Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, the chaos continues. The war continues. The politics continues. And we're going to continue to try to bring you leaders who are in the middle of all of it and hopefully adding light to contrast the heat and to maybe bring us some hope in the scary Halloween season that is upon us and is even scarier than ever. So I'm very pleased, honored, and thrilled to have a returning champion back on the program, Congressman from the great state of New York, our friend, the great and powerful Congressman Pat Ryan is back on Independent Americans. Welcome back, my friend.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I can't believe it's been a little over a year. It's been a wild, wild ride of my first year in Congress. But I joke with my colleagues, I shouldn't joke about this, but at least my term didn't start with a violent insurrection. So, on the relative scale, we're doing okay. We're doing okay.
A little perspective is good right now, especially for those of us in America that can feel a little detached from the horrors of war happening around the world. You're a great guy to bring perspective. I want to talk about everything. I want to talk about Israel. I want to talk about Ukraine. I want to talk about Tommy Tuberville. I want to talk about the speaker. But it was about a year ago since you joined us. You and I are old friends. I've known you a long time. So proud to see what you've done, especially in this last year. But I'll ground us in a question I ask everybody. Pat, where are you and how are you?
I'm sitting in my office in DC right now. We're between like literal chaos of having no speaker, which has not ever happened in the nearly 250-year history of the Congress. We're at a really dangerous, volatile point in every dimension. But weirdly, despite that, I'm actually good. I'm got my feet under me. We've got a great team that we've built here. We're working really hard, even amidst the kind of national chaos. We've been really focused on the district, just trying to move things forward where we can. And then when those critical fights come where, we've got to figure out both foreign policy challenges and things in the House, we're stepping up. So I feel good, and it's awesome to be with you.
Good. And the family's good. Halloween's coming. Family and kids are probably excited about Halloween and not really tracking on what's happening in the House of Representatives.
Thankfully, yeah, my 4-year-old, who's my older of my two boys, is like beyond pumped for Halloween. I can't even describe how pumped he is for Halloween, which is so awesome, as you can appreciate as a dad to see. So that keeps everything in very good perspective.
Well, you were my congressman when I lived upstate in Ulster County, and I will do a plug for the area always. There's no finer place around Halloween time than your district, the Hudson Valley. It's kind of peak Halloween with the foliage and the history of Halloween and all of it. So a big plug for your district and for that part of the state. I can't move off of that without asking, what are the kids going to be for Halloween, and what are you going to be for Halloween?
So I don't know what the heck I'm going to be. I can barely figure out where I'm going to be tomorrow, but my older is going to be a tiger again. Last year he was a tiger, but this year he's going to be a 4-year-old tiger. That's like his. So we're trying to convince him to change it up, but he's just sticking with a classic, and you can't fault him for that. And my younger is not able to speak yet, so we're deciding. I think he's gonna be like a bat or something adorable and fuzzy and warm.
Animals are always a good fallback. This is my annual disclosure. I'm going to give our listeners a sneak preview. The kids have decided it's Mario Brothers. So
yes,
big guy's going as Mario, little guy's going as Luigi. My wife is, of course, Princess Peach, and I'm Donkey Kong. So the reveal will be coming up. Check social media for that. But maybe you're going to have to go as an inspired, driven voice of reason in Congress, because we need it now more than ever. Let's start with the speaker situation, if we can. You're a new member of Congress. We've talked on the show about how your race, I think, represents a model for how to appeal to independents. You brought a broad coalition of people together. You're going to fight a re-election against a pretty radical right-wing candidate, or more than one. But you have been brought there to try to be a peacemaker, be a leader. But we're at this point where it feels like the Republicans can't agree on a speaker, and the Democrats actually think Hakeem Jeffries is going to get enough votes. The no shit here, Pat. What's the real path forward? You have to try to carve vision and a path forward where others can't see it, and that's where you've been great. What's the real path forward to get us an actual speaker in a time of war?
Yeah, and we can't underestimate what the consequences of this are. I mean, both direct and immediate in terms of Ukraine, Israel, China, and Taiwan, border security as well. But also the message this sends, and you say this all the time. Our enemies are watching, our adversaries are celebrating. I mean, you couldn't think of a few weeks stretch in recent American history where we've done more sort of harm and damage to our credibility just at the moment where it should be strengthening and growing and broader. So to me, like the path, the speaker opportunity is, you and I have talked about this a lot. Is there a moment where we can actually change the incentive structure in DC? Can we take a true unprecedented crisis, a failure of a speakership, a motion to vacate, and somehow craft like an actual bipartisan path out of this, where I've been using this language deliberately? We stop acting like politicians and we start acting and behaving like patriots. And it's very hard, but what that could manifest a few different ways mechanically. It could be a few Republicans voting for either Hakeem Jeffries, who's continually had the plurality of votes. That's really hard and would be unprecedented. Or just put forward a reasonable, moderate Republican for speaker. And we are ready to do that. I mean, when you put forward a Jim Jordan, who's an election denier, and also, by the way, he was not passed a single bill in 16 years in Congress, like that's not a serious proposal. So I'm still optimistic that this crisis presents some opportunity for us.
You said something, I think, on CNN that I thought was powerful when you said, we need like a coalition government, right? We see that in Israel now, where they're coming together in a time of war. But the reality is, they're not reasonable. They're not going to do it. And you've got this insurrectionist, what I've called the Confederate wing of the GOP, this extremist group that will never, allow people to vote for Hakeem Jeffries. They're going to keep putting forward Jim Jordan. And the most likely course of action, I mean, we can all understand the most dangerous course of action, which would be no speaker for months. The most likely course of action is continued stalemate, right? Where we just keep doing this. We could do this for months, right? And the wars could continue. China could invade Taiwan. All of that could happen, and Putin would be back there celebrating. So, I mean, how do you as a strategist plan for this? Are you planning for just paralysis for the next 3 months and you try to pick your spots as a leader? Because honestly, I'm not betting on you finding a moderate person that they will put forward, and you guys aren't going to get Jeffries through. So the most likely scenario is this is what we've got, maybe till the end of the year.
I'm more optimistic than that. I think the fact that the previous continuing resolution, which averted the shutdown just a few weeks ago, even though it feels like a few years ago, that expires November 17th. One of the very few things I've seen work here is an actual urgent deadline, like a government shutdown that would be catastrophic, that wouldn't pay, for example, the 2,000 Marines that are on their way or already en route to the Eastern Med, wouldn't pay all our troops, would affect folks on Social Security and Medicare. So I think that threat will be enough to at least get some kind of temporary solution addressed before November 17th. It won't be a meaningful thing, I fear, and it won't take on any of the more systemic sort of change and reform we're talking about. But I don't think, I think that we'll be able to avert that. We've seen what's so frustrating about how the House works. There will be broad bipartisan agreement on a bunch of issues. For example, funding for Ukraine. But if you could get that vote to the floor of the House, you'd have probably 300 plus folks from both parties that would support it. But the leadership, and I use that term very lightly, are so extreme that they won't allow these things to come to the floor. So what Democrats have asked for in any sort of coalition is a very reasonable request, which is, if there's a bill of any kind, big or small, that has bipartisan support, just let it come to the floor and let us vote on it.
But Pat, with all due respect, this is not a time for reasonableness. And this is a time where there's also kind of a failure of imagination. I'm talking about that in the intro in this show. So I think we've got to get imaginative. Are there any proposals from the Democrats to put anybody forward other than Hakeem Jeffries? I mean, he doesn't have the votes. Someone like you, as an example, might. So is there a scenario where the Democrats or a group of Democrats like you and others say, hey, we're not getting Jeffries through, maybe we can get Pat Ryan through?
Well, you're very flattering in that regard, but I think the more likely outcome, and this is where I actually think we can land. I think this is realistic. I think this is happening behind the scenes. I believe, a sort of service-oriented, could be a military veteran, could be someone else, but who's built that reputation as an actual patriot, above and beyond whatever their views are on certain issues. Republican. I mean, they have the majority. That's the will of the American people.
Yeah.
We have to respect that. It's slim, but that's real. So someone who can earn that trust and respect. And there are some names that are floating, folks some who you know, some of whom we served with. I think someone willing to step forward who would even say, look, I'm only going to do this for a year or for the remainder to get us through averting a shutdown, funding our allies, fighting for their lives in existential fights, and just sort of maintaining our core responsibilities and trust. That, I think, we're going to have another round of all these 8 or 9 folks that are being voted on as we speak. None of them are going to have the votes. Yep. They're all stabbing each other in the back. The knives are out. That hopefully then presents another opportunity after that. But your idea on another Democrat is certainly something I think.
I mean, look, it's not going to be a Democrat from New York City, right? It's not in this political environment, but it might be a moderate Democrat from upstate New York, someone like you, right? I think they've got to find someone that they can start to chip away from, because the calcification against Jeffries is not going to move, right? And I think you are the type of next generation leader that can bring forward ideas. If there's a moderate Republican that they put forward, which doesn't even really exist anymore, it's probably going to have to be a veteran. I think this is an exact moment where we need veterans to step up. We had Pete Buttigieg on recently. I've talked to them from both sides. I think this is an example of where we need those patriots, but we also need the creativity and the backbone. And I want to have you on also because you actually stepped up. Not a single member of Congress has stepped up to do anything about Tommy Tuberville other than whine, right? They go on TV and they bitch about it and they complain about it and they say Tommy Tuberville's mean, but nobody actually does anything to stop him from blocking, hundreds of military promotions. We've covered it at length on this show. So I want to applaud you for that. I applauded you on social media. I've put word out to the world that you were the first person to step up. And you said, I'm going to try to do something about Tuberville. It's largely symbolic, but let me ask you, explain what you've done. And in fairness, explain to me why you haven't called for him to resign, which is something I've been asking for everyone to do and not a single person has. Or maybe you want to do it on this show and make some news.
Yeah. So what we did, what I did with some co-sponsors, but we led it, was a House bill. So, all this plays out mostly in the Senate, all these confirmation processes, and it's been stuck in this totally nonsensical sort of situation where one member can hold it back. In this case, a total jackass who's not worn the uniform, has no clue, and is just a real dangerous threat to our national security, as you've said, and many others. So what I introduced was a House bill to try to apply some pressure from the House to say, look, the Senate, you need to, for the good of the country, especially given what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Ukraine, we can't go on any longer. Each day compounds the risk. So I was actually hopeful that I'd get maybe 1 or 2 Republicans to sign on to this, particularly those that have some national security experience, military experience, can understand how damaging this is. And we could not get a single Republican co-sponsor. I was making individual calls, personal calls, and everybody's just afraid of this sort of far-right Trump-led backlash where literally death threats are being made now around this to members of Congress and their families or young kids. And I mean, this echoes how fascist movements, and I don't say this lightly, but that's exactly how fascist movements have come to power throughout history of the world. And it's happening, it's the beginnings of it, but it's happening here. So in terms of the next step of escalation, if he doesn't act, I certainly would be open to calling for him to resign. That's a really grave thing, because I think that leaves no more sort of negotiating room. I always try to give people some room to do the right thing, but he's run out of runway. So
I mean, you guys are, look, I mean, the Democrats are always negotiating with terrorists. I mean, he's a political suicide bomber who will not compromise. And he said that, he's made it clear he's not going to give it up. So the question for you all is, what are you going to do about it? Like, the Republicans have said, I'm going to do nothing about it. You're trying to take some action, but I'm going to ask every single member of Congress, what are you actually doing about it? And this is where independents like me, especially, get frustrated. Republicans do something bad. Democrats whine about it and can't stop it. So who has signed on, Pat? I mean, you said no Republicans have signed on, and we'll keep updating folks about it. But has anybody signed on yet or offered to lead along your side in the Senate? Because we've seen Senator Kelly has talked a good game, Senator Warren's talked a good game, but there's no companion bill in the Senate happening right now.
No, not yet. And to be clear, and this is wonky, but a bill, I mean, ultimately this plays out in like the rules, which I know this is where I get frustrated too, where you tell me there's a problem and I want to fix it. And then someone's, well, this rule, da, da, da. But so to resolve this, it ultimately has to be fixed in the Senate rules and reducing the ability for these political terrorists, as you said, to have so much power, so much sort of asymmetric power to hold things up that are so critical. So that is actually, my legislation called for a lifting of the holds, but it also called for a changing of the rules so that particularly to military confirmations, we don't repeat this situation in either direction. I mean, you could see an extremist, I guess, in theory, in another party doing something for some other sort of selfish and political reason. So I gotta, it's a good point on a Senate bill. I'll reach out to folks. I mean, I know all my Democratic Senate colleagues have been vocal about it, but to your point, they have not taken up the procedural part of it.
Yeah, and look, these are extreme times. What he's doing is exceptionally extreme, and it requires extreme measures. So people, are more concerned with maybe protocol or being nice than the fact that this guy is blocking commanders of the naval operations that we're conducting in the Middle East right now to protect Israel. I mean, I think we have to underscore how serious this is. And if an active member of the Senate is going to undermine our national security, we got to get him out. We got to stop him, get him out. Don't let him do the work of our enemies, because I think it's that extreme. And I think we're looking to the Senate to see who's going to step up. And it's also populist. I think you're going to find independents respond to this. I think Democrats want to respond to this. They want to see people fight harder. And it looks like right now, Tuberville's taking the low road and he's winning in support of his objective. He's winning. So I hope you can break that log jam. I appreciate the fact that you've done it. A lot of members of Congress have texted me and emailed me and said, hey, appreciate what you're doing out there. I said, great. Say that publicly. Do something publicly. You're the one guy who did. And I'm glad it's you, because you also represent West Point, which is important, and you understand how this impacts our community. But I think you're a person of action. So I appreciate that exceptionally. Let me ask you, related to all this, an underreported part of this, this unfolding in the Middle East is that American troops are being wounded. American troops were wounded in Iraq. There are consistently now drone attacks on our forces there. Yesterday, Secretary Austin says we are expecting attacks. There is very much a World War III scenario where attacks are happening across the Middle East on U.S. forces. Iran is involved. Hezbollah is involved. China makes a play at Taiwan, and this really unfolds. And I feel like most folks don't appreciate that pieces are already happening where American troops are being hit and wounded in Iraq. So can you talk about that specifically, given your experience? What do you know, and what do you think we should be doing, most of all, to protect American troops that are in Israel, in Syria, in Iraq, and throughout the region?
Yeah, everything you said is right. We've been getting regular classified briefings. I'm on the Armed Services Committee, so we've been getting these exact briefings specific to U.S. force protection of our troops across the CENTCOM region, from Syria to Iraq. And now, yeah, we do have several hundred folks in an advisory role in Israel. We just saw Marine 3-star sent yesterday, or the announcement yesterday. And this is a very, very dangerous, specifically both the escalation from Hezbollah, which is an Iranian proxy almost under their direct control on the northern Israeli border, the rate and volume and frequency and intensity of the fire, the indirect fires and rocket fires that they're launching, is in and of itself unprecedented, separate from, in addition to what's happening in Gaza. And then we are very concerned about the incentive structure and the initial reporting of Iran directly, but particularly their proxies. The Houthi rebels from Africa have been firing several cruise missiles that we intercepted from U.S. naval assets in the region. I mean, this is when, as you said, I hope history looks back at this moment and says we were danger close and we averted potential World War III scenarios, but it could also easily escalate unintentionally. And we know, I believe, Iran has every incentive to continue to escalate just below the threshold that they think would trigger us. But that's that dangerous calculus that often goes wrong, that when you study the start of World War I and World War II is exactly what led to the same thing. And then you layer in Ukraine and what Russia's intentions are. If we don't pass a strong supplemental funding bill to signal resolve and unity, but also provide the resources needed for Israel and Ukraine and in the Indo-Pacific, that will send a devastating message in terms of our strength and resolve, and will embolden all of these actors from Tehran to Beijing to Moscow.
You know, I think Putin's had a good couple of weeks. Despite the losses in Ukraine, you know, the chips are unfolding in ways that benefit him tremendously, and is compounded by the paralysis of the American government, where not only can we not pass budgets, we can't send funding to our allies. We're still vulnerable to cyber attacks and plenty of other elements that are below the radar. I thought the president appropriately framed up the war against Putin and Hamas. You know, he said support Israel and support Ukraine, but I think we've got to flip it and say it's a war against Putin and a war against Hamas. And once you understand that framework, I think Americans can wrap their heads around it a little bit better. But let me ask you again, Pat, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, I feel like it's being lost that Americans are being held hostage right now. We don't know their names for the most part. I haven't seen them in the media, and maybe there's a strategy behind that. But Americans are right now being held by Hamas in Gaza. We talked to Dan Lamothe, who talked about the military forces that are likely in the region. There are likely others that we don't know about. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, as a veteran, what can you tell us about what America's doing right now to bring our own home from Gaza?
I know, and I don't want to go too much into it, this is the number 1, 2, and 3 priority right now. We have exactly the people that you would want and hope and expect focus on this, both at the sort of senior level within the White House, within the Pentagon, but very much on the ground, both primarily embedded by, with, and through the IDF, but prepared as necessary to, as we have to do in every place around the globe, protect American lives. Most of these are dual citizens, American and Israeli. So we're working closely with Israel on approximately a dozen of those individuals that are dual U.S. Israeli. But as you can appreciate, as many of your listeners can appreciate, how complex this whole situation would be, even without the hostage dynamic, in terms of urban warfare, the planning that goes with it, Hamas having years to build deeply entrenched tunnel networks to prepare defense in depth. It's going to be really tough fighting, and then you layer in the risk to hostages. So I'm very confident that we are on that in the ways that we should be, and I think that is important for people to be aware of, reassured of, and my colleagues and I are asking the hard questions about that in all of these discussions we're having.
You know, I give you and others credit because I know you're a strong supporter of Israel. I know you care about civilian loss of life. I think this is a moment for post 9/11 veterans, especially, to raise their voices and experience. We've been talking to the Israelis about learning the mistakes of 9/11 and not repeating them. And I feel like, at least in the first couple of weeks here, that has sunk in. And the restraint is there, in part because of the American influence and because of the hard lessons we've learned. But I do feel like, you know, the hourglass is running out on Ukraine, and many in Ukraine right now are not hearing enough support from members of Congress. So straight up, as an American veteran, what do you want to say to our Ukrainian allies that are on the front line in the fight right now, that include some of our, you know, friends who are American veterans who've joined the fight in Ukraine because they consider it the fight of our time?
Number one, I am so damn proud and appreciative of how bravely and how long you all have fought. Number two, I and the vast preponderance, 300 plus of my colleagues in the House support you, have voted over and over and over for funding for you. And number three, I am embarrassed and outraged at my colleagues who pathetically have gotten weak-kneed after early declarations of support and alliance and Ukrainian flags that are still many in my community. We have a big Ukrainian American community in my district that we're proud of and have been in close coordination with. So the support is still there, but we have to fight back against some of these really extreme voices that are loud and have undercut that support. I think it's incumbent on people like me and folk, the president too, to continue to make this case to the American people, because when they hear the stakes, when they see the bravery of all those fighting and the success, the improbable and incredible success, like, we have to continue to push and support until there's a decisive victory.
Last question, then I'll let you go. I know you got to get votes and go back into the chaos. Maybe you could go as a voice of reason for Halloween, but you're also in a re-election fight. I mean, this is how it goes. I feel like you've run more elections than anybody in America, but you got to run again. The battlefield's shaping up. We've talked about how you won on what I think is a message that appeals to independent Americans. So let me ask you, what's your message to folks in your district who are independents specifically? What's your message to them on why they should vote for you for re-election?
I think when you boil it all away, what's happening right now is who is on the side of which side are you on of two things? One, freedom, both in the country and around the world. Are you, as we're being tested in all the ways we just talked about, are you going to stand with democratic, small d democratic allies around the world who are taking direct attacks for their commitment to freedom and democratic values? And here in this country, as we see really aggressive extremist far-right efforts to take away reproductive rights and freedoms, take away voting rights that have actually been worse in the last few years and accelerated, are you on the side of freedom or not? And Democrats have consistently been on the side of freedom and on the side of democracy, small d democracy, in the face of insurrections and so many other things. So that is really the test to me. The other thing on a more just kind of individual level is just, and I hope I behave this way, I'm certainly trying to just be an authentic person of some character. Like, say what you're going to do, follow through on it. No, people aren't going to agree with you on everything, but be clear about it and be consistent about it. And at the individual level, that's really been our main focus, has been on that, on good constituent services, on restoring trust in the little things that we can still do. And I maybe I'm naive, but I think that still matters an awful lot. Like, we helped somebody recover like about $10,000 in back taxes they were owed. I don't know what party they were, but like, I'm pretty sure they appreciated that. And I hope if they come out and vote, they'll recognize that our team, and it's really my team, worked really hard for them. And we do that hundreds of constituent cases every week. So that matters a lot too.
It does matter. You deliver, and I saw that firsthand when you were Ulster County executive, and I told people that, and every time they tested you on it, you delivered. Like, I was able to tell you which power lines were down, on which mountain in Ulster County on the way to Woodstock or out to Phoenicia. You always were on top of it, and you took on some important fights, like battling the electrical companies and talking about cost of living and things that matter. And I think that, like I told Pete Buttigieg a couple weeks ago, and I've told Wes Moore and others, if you are the new face of the Democrats, you are going to appeal to a lot of independents. But I think the most important part is it's you. And we need leaders who step up in this moment, who have integrity, who lead the right way, and independents will support those people especially, but so will Democrats and Republicans. We're starved for leadership. And in a short time, you've really shown a lot of it, my friend. So I'm honored to know you. I'm so fucking glad it's you down there when it could have been someone else. And I really am grateful to you and to your family for taking this mission on at this important time, my friend.
No, thank you, Paul. Your advice at critical points, never subtle, never in doubt of what what you think, which we need it. I mean, we need real clarity, like moral clarity in this country right now. And you've been doing that in all the ways that, from TV to the podcast to just the conversations we have. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate that we all still love this country and still believe in it. I mean, that's at the end of the day, what scares me and gets me down is when I feel that we're going out on patrol, right? You look around with your fellow soldiers, they're in it. Like, you're going to do the best you can for each other. You look around Congress right now, it's hard to feel that way. And there are some, but we need more of those kind of folks who get it. So I think we're on the right direction, but we got to keep pushing.
I remember a September 11th dinner we had on my rooftop a couple blocks from Ground Zero. And I think there was one when you were there, Wes Moore was there, maybe Zainab Salbi was there, Daisy Khan. We had people from all backgrounds and all sides, but a lot of folks that have really been meeting this moment now. And I hope that maybe one day, one of y'all is president and we can have a dinner like that in the White House and show that unity and show that strength and show that leadership, because y'all are out there doing it. And you most of all, my friend, I appreciate it. Keep it up. Keep giving them hell. We're proud of you. I hope you do have a happy Halloween, and your kids especially have a happy Halloween. That might break the ice a little bit, as everybody in Congress, without getting too cute. They need to just, all dress up for Halloween and go trick-or-treating a little bit with the kids. And maybe that'll help them remember their humanity and remember, what it was like to get along as kids on Halloween. But you're a great leader, my friend. Go get them and stay vigilant, and happy Halloween.
Thanks, Paul.